Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program tonight with Kent District Library and the Legal Aid of Western Michigan. We're very happy to partner with them on some more programs, and tonight on fraudulent scams should be very interesting. I'm going to throw it to Steve in just a minute here, but remember that it is Summer Wonder. So we're doing summer reading at Kent District Library all the way through August the 7th. Make sure you go to kdl.org/summer to see how you can sign up. You can also pick up materials at your local KDL branch library and partake in Summer Wonder. Part of Summer Wonder is also we have lots and lots of programs. So if you go to kdl.org/events, you can go and you can see all of those. Many of them streaming this summer still, like this program tonight. So there's lots of different things that you can do and enjoy. So right now we're going to get our program rolling, and I'm going to bring Steve into the stream. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, Kip. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having us, and thanks to the Kent District Library as well. So as Kip mentioned, I work with Legal Aid of Western Michigan, and my colleague John Smith is going to join us in just a minute. A little bit of background about what Legal Aid does. We're a nonprofit law office. We're based in Grand Rapids, but we serve 17 counties in Western Michigan. And we deliver free legal help to people and families who live in or near poverty, along with a lot of seniors we help too. People usually come to us when they have civil, so non-criminal legal problems that threaten their livelihoods or their lives in some way. Our clients include low-income people and families who are threatened with losing their homes or apartments. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. We help people who need help on family law issues or with unemployment insurance issues, other kinds of benefits that help people achieve income and food security. We also do work with criminal record expungements and more. Toward the end of the program, we'll have a slide that has a little more information about us and some contact info. Tonight, we're going to help you understand a scam that targets typically struggling homeowners. This is the so-called foreclosure rescue idea. We're going to run through a few tips, and those tips are going to give you knowledge and tools to protect yourselves from the scammers, we hope. Before I turn things over to my colleague, John, I do have a little bit of lawyer fine print. So if we can jump along to the next slide. This is it, just a little disclaimer language for you. You can't take this as legal advice tonight. We can't offer legal advice this way. So nothing here is a substitute for an actual one-on-one consult with an attorney. We're going to offer you a lot of information and some general ideas, but that's as far as we can go right here. Okay, so if we can move along, I'll introduce my colleague, John. John is a supervising attorney here at Legal Aid, and he runs our strategic litigation unit. I think for tonight, the most important thing to know is that John has spent a lot of his career helping low-income homeowners and tenants to protect their rights and to get fair treatment in the justice system. So with that, let me bring in and turn things over to John.
Good evening, everybody. As Steve said, my name is John Smith. I'm with Legal Aid of Western Michigan, and I'm just going to jump right into our discussion about foreclosure rescue scams. To start things off, I do want to point out that there are really two times when you might be threatened with foreclosure, and they're quite different. The first is if you've borrowed any money, you've given somebody a mortgage on your home, and you stop making payments on that mortgage or something, they declare a default and they go through foreclosure process. And the second is if, for some reason, the property taxes on a piece of property aren't getting paid. After a long enough period of time, that also goes through a process. But as I mentioned, those are very different processes. So I just want to cover, this is a very simple description of the two different processes. Keep in mind that there's a lot more going on here. When you're faced with a mortgage foreclosure, your lender will send a variety of letters and try to contact you in a variety of ways. Ultimately, if the issue doesn't get resolved, they will post a notice on your property that explains the date of a sheriff sale. Now, that sale can get adjourned from time to time, but at some point, if it takes place, there will be what's called a redemption period, a period after that sheriff sale. It's usually about 6 months, but it can change under circumstances. And during that redemption period, you have the right to pay off the amount that was paid for at the sheriff sale, and you keep the property. So it's this escalating process that results in a share sale and then a period of time to redeem. With a tax foreclosure, it's a longer process. A tax foreclosure, the taxing entity really forecloses on taxes that have not been paid for 3 years or so. And there's a variety of notices that come through, but they all look kind of the same. You'll get notices of the non-payment and then a forfeiture notice, and then after another year, in March of that last year, if you don't pay the taxes and the extra fees that get added on, by the end of March, the property is foreclosed on. The problem is, after that longer period of time, after the March foreclosure, there is no redemption period. At that point, the owner has lost the property. So it's a much, in my opinion, scarier procedure, even though it is a little bit longer. Now, in either case, these are public events where if you don't come up with a significant amount of money quickly, you could lose your home. And so this presents, because it's public, an opportunity for bad actors to take advantage of the situation. So let's move on to our first tip, which is to keep in contact with your mortgage company. Now, this is obviously focusing on mortgage foreclosures. So one of the best ways, if you're in any kind of a dispute or behind on your mortgage, to stay ahead of the game is to keep in contact with your mortgage company. Simply calling customer service and talking and making sure you understand where you are at the process. Now, it can be a little bit frustrating, honestly. We call these companies mortgage servicers. They're oftentimes not the place they actually borrowed the money, and they're known for not having the greatest customer service. Add to that you tend to, once you get placed in the default servicing, the customer service gets even worse. And keeping in mind that these are national organizations and they're trying to deal with 50 different state-specific processes, it's kind of understandable that they may have kind of broad-based or bad information sometimes. But while it is frustrating, it is a good place to stay up to date on what's going on. I do also want to point out that this process can get even more frustrating if you are not on the note. So you're not the actual borrower that signed the debt. This often happens in cases with where there's a divorce issue or a probate issue. But that also means that these are sometimes the most important times to be staying up to date with that mortgage company. And in those situations, they'll request additional documentation, and you should do your best to provide them as quickly as possible. And honestly, you'll be providing them over and over again sometimes. So like I said, frustration is the name of the game there. Now, those conversations can happen, or those communications can happen over the phone. There's nothing wrong with simply continuing those communications over time. But keep in mind that you do have the right to make written requests to mortgage servicers to either request information or to challenge information, or to challenge the way that they are treating or servicing your loan. So if you disagree with something, or if you simply want information, you can send what is legally called a qualified written request. Now, these requests have to be in writing, and the servicer, unless they designate a different address, you can send them to the normal address for billing. But if the servicer does have the right to designate an address to send those notices to, you can usually find that address by looking at the back or the second page of your monthly statement, or just going onto that servicer's website. Every servicer is a little bit different, but it has to be fairly easy to find. When you send that qualified written request, make sure that you have the right address. Send it certified mail. There's no requirement to, but that way you can prove that you sent it and that they received it. Keep a receipt of the certified mailing. We call it a green card that comes back, or else when you first mail it, you get a kind of a green receipt with a tracking number. And make a copy of the actual written request that you sent, the document that you sent to them. It's also helpful to, you can just log on to the U.S. Postal Service website to get a copy of that tracking information to prove that it was delivered. Now, the servicers have 30 business days to respond. There's some special rules about the different types of responses, and this is a federal law that requires this, and they go by business days, which is a little bit different than Michigan law where we just count the days. So 30 business days could be, a month and a half or more. Now let's move on to tip 2. Sorry, guys. And that is simply to check your taxes. And here we're talking about, again, more focusing on the tax foreclosure process. One of the best ways to avoid a tax foreclosure is simply to periodically check and make sure that you've paid your taxes. Most townships or tax authorities these days have the assessor's office has a website where you can check the current status of your home and see if it's been paid. Otherwise, just check the notices that you get periodically, usually twice a year, and make sure that they're showing that you are current in your taxes. Remember that you do have 3 years to pay those taxes, but once the foreclosure goes through, you've lost the right to the property, so you really don't want to push that envelope. And also keep in mind that, as I said before, those notices look an awful lot alike. So it's very easy sometimes to disregard a notice because it looks just like the normal notices that you get that just look like the informational notices saying that how much your taxes are. Now, along with getting your taxes paid, you may want to take a look at a couple of other things that may help you reduce your tax burden. The first is just to confirm that if you are living in your house, this is your primary residence, make sure that it is receiving the full or as much as you can get of the principal residence exemption. This is a state law exemption that reduces significantly the amount of taxes you pay on your principal residence. If you have, for instance, a duplex where only half of that property is your primary residence, it may only be a 50% what we call PRE. But most people will have, if it's a primary residence, it should be listed at 100% PRE. And this is found, again, on that assessor's website or on the notices that you receive from the taxing authority. There's some odd reasons that the properties do not get listed as your primary residence exemption. Every once in a while, somebody's owned a property for just so long that they never actually got it listed. Also, if there's been a change of ownership through estate planning, or if you own it in a trust, that can accidentally trigger the PRE getting lifted. Or if you're purchasing the property on a land contract, maybe nobody ever got it properly listed as your primary residence. But in all those circumstances, it should be listed as your primary residence. One nice thing about the PRE is that you have the ability to apply retroactively. Go back 3 years, apply 3 years back on. So another more limited option is what's called the poverty exemption. This is an exemption for people who live below the federal poverty limit. And each city or township is supposed to have its own application process in Michigan. It can be a more difficult application. Sometimes you have to go in person to pick up the paperwork. Unlike the PRE, where once you apply, it's there until they get notice that you've moved. The poverty exemption is something you have to apply for each and every year. And it can be an awkward process that's a little bit different from each place. Additionally, you can't go backwards. So you can apply this year. We're in June, and you can apply for July's still this year and get the full poverty exemption. However, you can't retroactively apply. And now let's move on to tip 3. Tip 3 is simply to investigate your options. Now I'm really talking about when you find yourself in a bit of trouble. You're behind in your mortgage, or you're behind in your taxes, and you're being threatened with some form of foreclosure. The first step is simply not to panic. I realize you're maybe in a very delicate position, and it's easy to stick your head in the sand and stop, be overwhelmed with worry. But realize that there are steps that you can take to protect yourself. One of the first things you should do is to find out exactly what you owe and understand the time frames you're dealing with. We described a little bit of that earlier, but these can be very short time frames sometimes, and sometimes you can have a year or more to figure out what's going on. You may want to get the help of a nonprofit housing counselor. The best place to locate those is through MSHDA's website. MSHDA stands for the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. They maintain a county by county list of nonprofit organizations in Michigan that provide those free services. And those housing counselors will help you find services in your community and also help you sometimes negotiate with mortgage companies or other entities that you're dealing with in this process. One of the, well, maybe the best way to avoid a foreclosure may require you to borrow some money to avoid it, to pay off the indebtedness you have. Please be cautious and to shop around. Contact your bank or your credit union and see what you can do to solve that problem. Check between banks. Just because one of them rejects you doesn't mean that they all will. And there was a study a few years ago about people applying for mortgages. One thing they found was while there is pretty big discrepancies from one bank to another about what they offer and how much they charge for different services, most people tend not to shop around. These are very large loans, and they choose their mortgage oftentimes simply by going to the first place that they're referred to and never shopping around. So push back against that and shop around for your options. Also realize that you may need time to do things like clean up your credit before you can get that loan. And so make sure that you're acting quickly to go through that process. And that's another thing that the housing counselor can help you with. Also keep in mind that if you're faced with a foreclosure, we mentioned earlier about talking with your mortgage servicer, but your mortgage servicer may have options that they can directly offer you, such as a modification of the mortgage. So please review those options with them and stay in contact with them for that reason. It's another situation though where you end up providing documents over and over again, sometimes reapplying and things. It's a frustrating process. That's the name of the game here. But also keep in mind that up until the date of the sale, you have a right to stop any foreclosure by filing a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. So if you're really faced with foreclosure prospects, you may want to contact a local bankruptcy attorney to review your ability to do that Chapter 13 bankruptcy. You may want to, again, shop around for the right attorney who's right for you. Don't go with the first attorney that you're referred to. There's differences in service, obviously, but also in costs. Chapter 13 bankruptcies tend to be a little bit more expensive than the Chapter 7 bankruptcies that people are more familiar with. So next, let's turn to tip 4, which is to beware of what people are selling. As I mentioned earlier, both tax foreclosures and mortgage foreclosures are public events. There are notices that are published in newspapers, and a lot of people or entities actually pay money to get lists of people who are facing these types of foreclosures. They're embarrassing processes, but they're also an opportunity for bad actors to contact you and to solicit you directly through the mail, directly in person, sometimes just knocking on your door. In fact, I've had clients who realize for the first time that they're facing a sheriff's sale, not because they ever saw the notice that was supposed to be posted on the door, but because they got these solicitations. So they come very quickly and they come frequently. Keep in mind that people may start coming to your house and they may be offering you services. They claim that they are real estate agents that can help you sell. They claim that they're hard money lenders or some other thing, that they're basically trying to solicit you to get you out of this foreclosure, to help you sell the property and get money out. Sometimes they'll offer you a loan. Sometimes they'll, when they do that, the actual document that you sign isn't a loan. It's a sale to them of the property at a very low price, basically the price of what you owe in the foreclosure. And you may, in part of that document, either rent the property back or have an option to purchase it back. But it's not a sale not a loan like they promise. It's a sale, and you lose the title to your property. So it can be a very frustrating process, and it brings out some of the worst actors in this process. So I think I've said it already, but be very, very cautious of the people who are coming to your door and offering to save you. You have the right to review anything that they offer or any offers that they make, to read those documents, to read it on your own time, not in front of them, to have your friends or family review them for you, to a MSHDA housing counselor, to talk to an attorney and have your attorney review those documents for you. If you're a lower income person, I just really, really encourage you at that point, if not before, to contact Legal Aid of Western Michigan or some other agency. And keep in mind, you just have the right to be left alone as well. People don't have the right to bug you at your home. At a minimum, please make sure that you are reading everything before you sign it. And there's a difference between what a person is saying a document means and what the plain language of that document is. Do not sign it. Do not believe them. We also often get overwhelmed by this paperwork, but paperwork, legal contracts are not made to be confusing. If something is very confusing, it's probably because somebody is trying to swindle you. So be cautious. Now, I do want to point out this presentation is really focused on foreclosure rescue scams and people in foreclosure. But it's worth pointing out that right now, with this high demand in housing, there are many bad actors going door to door, pressuring people to sell their homes and using the same high pressure tactics to do this. There was a study out of, I believe, Pennsylvania a couple of years ago that found that, especially among more vulnerable adults, one of the key reasons that people sold their homes was often simply that they got bugged so much that they felt they were supposed to do so. So again, if people are bothering you to sell your home, you have the right to be left alone. If you're interested in selling, do not, you're much better off listing that on the public market, not just seeing what offer somebody brings you at your door. Okay, so let's move on to tip 5, which is that simply that your rights don't end when you sign on the dotted line. And I teach this class on consumer law, and I really spend a lot of time warning people that you do actually lose a lot of rights when you do sign on the dotted line. But it happens all the time that people get talked into signing agreements that are unfair or unconscionable, and especially when those documents deal with attempts to save your home or refinancing your home. You do have rights even after you sign the contract. Generally speaking, contracts are binding when you sign them, but there are some avenues available to you when you sign an unfair contract or something that you regret. First, keep in mind that there are some contracts where you have the absolute right to rescind. Those rights to rescind can be very short timelines, 3 days often. So if you wake up in the morning and you really question your decision, again, don't sit on your rights. Move very quickly to have that document reviewed by somebody and decide if you have the right to rescind and if that's what you really want to do. You have that right to rescind if there's a door-to-door sales contract or if the contract is a home refinance. And keep in mind, as I mentioned before, some of those offerings where a person says that they're refinancing or loaning you money, and in fact it looks like a sale, can be viewed as a refinance. Also, many of these transactions that we're describing violate the Federal Truth in Lending Act. This is the statute that, like when you buy a car, requires that interest rates be disclosed and other fees. There's the TILA boxes, we call them, on car purchases, which are the 4 boxes up on the top of that contract. Now, depending on the nature of the contract, you may have up to 1 or even 3 years to bring a lawsuit under that law. So it's a little bit more time, but that time goes quickly as well. So again, you don't want to sit on those rights. You want to contact an attorney as soon as you can. You also may have the right to rescind a contract based on specific facts in your situation, like the pressure that you were put under to sign it or the unconscionability. And that's really a case-by-case basis. It's important to understand that just because you signed that agreement doesn't mean that you're out of options. So the most important 2 steps that you can take are to have those documents and paperwork, to save all those documents and paperwork that you have, and to get legal help as soon as you can. I'd add to that to record as soon as you can what actually happened in some way. So making notes of what actually occurred shortly after the occurrence can be helpful. Now, let's close things out with one final bonus tip, a little extra. And that's that I just want to ask you to be very cautious about reverse mortgages. A reverse mortgage is a loan. It's either made in a lump sum or it can be a line of credit that you can kind of take out over time. It's secured by your home, so it's a mortgage, and it earns interest like a regular mortgage. But the plan is that you never really pay on that mortgage or to pay it off. Instead, you do have to maintain insurance on the property and live in the property. Basically, the mortgage is paid off when you either die or you move out of the home to go into assisted living or something like that. At that point, the mortgage company takes back the collateral either through a foreclosure or a deed in lieu of foreclosure, something like that. Now, because there's no real payments that the borrower sees, in my experience, mortgage companies doing reverse mortgages often add significant fees to these loans, including sometimes fees for taking out the loan or servicing the mortgage. So that increases that principal balance, and it makes it very hard. For instance, if your real goal is to give that house to a loved one, after you pass, it makes it real hard for them to afford that. Also, these reverse mortgages are intended for people who are over 62, and it really should cover both spouses, so where there's a married couple. However, we do see situations where mortgage lenders will have the younger spouse remove themselves from the title to the property to make it a loan that qualifies. The problem is that then years later, the older spouse passes away, and the mortgage company then moves to foreclose on the surviving spouse, this person who is going to lose their home kind of in their sunset years of their life when they really counted on living there until they died. Now, HUD regulates many reverse mortgages, and they've done some work to add non-borrower spouses to that reverse mortgage. But you have to be proactive and request that, and that policy only applies to HUD-insured reverse mortgages. So for these reasons, I'd really be cautious about reverse mortgages. Keep in mind that they can be useful tools for retirement and estate planning, especially if you really don't have the money to stay in the home and keep everything up, but you'd like to stay in the home as long as possible. However, they do come at a high cost, and you should make sure that you completely understand those costs and agree to them before agreeing to reverse mortgage. So, Steve, I think I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, John. Thanks very much for running through everything. And I will check with Kip in a second to see if we've had any questions come in as comments, but I'll just recap our tips in the meantime. So as John just went through, number one, know to stay in touch with your mortgage company, follow the mail that's coming in if you're getting a lot of it, know what is actually coming from your mortgage company, and don't be afraid to pick up the phone and just deal with the frustration of customer service, which we all deal with. Number two, check on your property tax status, know what's going on there. Number three, John mentioned that there's a lot of help available for people who are struggling. First thing is just don't panic. Step back, take a breath, and then look for the resources that are above board, that are legit, and that are out there to help you. John mentioned the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MISHDA. Their website, you can find it easy if you Google it, but their web address is michigan.gov/MSHDA, or as we're saying, MISHDA. There's a lot of housing counselors who are legit and above board who are out there. Some of the MISHDA online resources can connect you with them. So, and if you do get into a place where you need to borrow, find above board ways to do that. The last two tips, tips 4 and 5, just be real careful about what people are selling you. Do all the investigation you can. And then remember that even after you're entered into some kind of a contract, you still have rights that you can assert. You may want to talk with a lawyer about those. And then John mentioned to be real careful and completely understand what you're getting into and who's getting into it with reverse mortgages. All righty, Kip, I didn't see any questions come in. Anything?
No questions tonight.
Okay, John, I'm not going to bug you with any questions either. I just, as Kip just advanced the slide there, I wanted to share contact information for us, for Legal Aid of Western Michigan. So you see our website address there. We do online and telephone intake, and you can see that we have 5 offices, our Grand Rapids headquarters, and then 4 regional offices throughout our 17 county service region. So if you're in some trouble and you want to get in touch with us, by all means do. Kip, with that, I think we can wrap things up, and I'll turn it back over to you with my thanks again to you, to the library, to everybody who watched and joined us, and to my colleague, John.